Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. So now that we're getting political and calling it like it is, calling ourselves activists and doing something about it, let's jump straight into our first story and interview. Now, if you've ever been to a rally or event in Washington, D.C. in the past 5-6 years, chances are that Margaret Flowers had something to do with it. In fact, she might also have had something to do with that event or action outside of D.C. For the past 8 years, she's been organizing on a local and national level, full-time. Along with the sites It's Our Economy and Flush the TPP, a site that may sound familiar to you guys, Popular Resistance, the site she founded with partner Kevin Zeese, is basically a go-to for all the news that's unfit to print in corporate media, plus an event calendar for actions and rallies, plus links and tools to drive your distaste for the corporatized state into full-blown activism. Zeese and Flowers work together to organize, execute, and report on actions that push for a variety of causes, be it anti-fracking, anti-TPP, pro-civil rights, and more. The underlying theme to all of these, however, is the fight against the system, bought and sold, of, for, and by the rich, white, and old, pushing to break the corporate mold. And her next endeavor is to occupy the Senate. Dr. Margaret Flowers is running for U.S. Senate as a Green Party candidate from Maryland. Between her organizing, occupying, and now campaigning, I got a chance to sit down with her and talk politics. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Take a look. You are a pediatrician, but you left your practice in 2007. Why was that?
Well, I practiced for 15 years, and over that time, it was just becoming clearer and clearer that our healthcare system is not about health at all. It's actually puts obstacles in the way of people being able to get the care that they need, and doctors and other health professionals being able to practice. So I just decided I needed to do advocacy, and if I wanted to be effective at that, I needed to do that full time. So I left practice just to focus on changing that system.
So give me a couple of examples of how you came to this realization that the system was broken.
When you admit a child to the hospital and the insurance company tells you how many days that child can stay in the hospital, and it has nothing to do with what would be appropriate care for them. It takes that control out of your hands. You have to fight with them if you feel like a child needs to stay longer. You write a prescription, and then your patient goes to the pharmacist, and the pharmacist calls you and says you need authorization. And I'm like, well, isn't a prescription authorization? Like, didn't I just order this medicine? And just, if you want to get any kinds of treatments or get in to see appropriate specialists, it's just all these obstacles and financial obstacles. The conversations become about, can the patient afford what they need, rather than, is this what they need? That's the wrong conversation.
In 2011, you helped lead the occupation of D.C. at Freedom Plaza. And since then, you've also occupied outside the FCC for net neutrality. You've staged hundreds of actions and events, not just in the DC area, but across the country, with Popular Resistance and Flush the TPP. So what brought you specifically to do that, and why did you choose that particular path of advocacy?
Well, it's been a journey all the way. It's still a learning process. And so for me, it was, 2009, 2010, I was very involved in the health reform process in Washington, D.C., and trying to push for what the majority of people in this country want and need, a single-payer healthcare system. And we kept being told that was off the table. And so we protested, we lobbied, we did whatever. And that whole experience showed me how kind of corrupt the system is, how controlled it is, and it's not about what people want or need. And also it showed me the power of direct action to influence that process. And so I started seeing also that if I'm just fighting for a single-payer healthcare system, I'm never going to build enough political power to get that. It's really about saying that this is connected. This is part of the broader struggle for social, economic, and racial and environmental justice. And if we all work together and start being more strategic, we can't just go out and do a symbolic protest. That's a waste of time. Mm-hmm. But if we're really strategic about what we do, then we can start to affect change and build a movement that's going to shift political power.
So talk a little bit about that interconnectedness. You're quoted as saying, "I view the struggle for healthcare as part of a broader social, racial, economic, and environmental justice movement." Expound a little bit on that.
Well, if we just gave people access to healthcare, we wouldn't have a healthier society, because the majority of our health is impacted by things outside of the health office. It's, do you have a home? Do you have a job with a living wage? Do you have adequate education? Can you get clean water, healthy food in your community? All of these things have a significant impact on our health. And so if we want a healthy society, we've got to change all of these things. And also, I think that being a physician puts me in a mindset, which many others share, is that you want to go to the root of the problem. You don't want to just be treating the symptoms. And so, you just get deeper and deeper, and it's like, well, it's actually not about just providing housing. It's about this whole economic and political system that exploits people and exploits the environment, and that's got to change.
And do you feel that elected officials, and I'll get to your campaign in a second, but do you feel that elected officials, because a lot of people say that, oh, well, Obama can't do anything about it. The system is so rigged that even if you have good intentions on the way in, by the time you're in, you really can't do anything. Do you agree with that sort of like hands up, I can't do anything about it?
No, it's a very convenient excuse, and our politicians are just experts at making excuses. Because look, the Obamacare was passed only with votes from Democrats. So this whole thing about we couldn't get enough votes to do a single payer when 80% of registered Democrats support single payer was completely false. If Obama wanted to get the votes, he would get the votes. Look at the fast track fight that we just had earlier this year. Despite millions of people in the country speaking out against it, politicians that understood and didn't like it, they were able to, and you saw, Obama even came to Capitol Hill at the last moment to twist arms and force members of Congress to vote for fast track, and got only exactly the minimum number of votes that they needed to pass it. Nobody else was going to put their political career on the line by being associated with it. So when they want the votes, when they want to get something, they can do it. So, to me, that's a complete excuse, and it doesn't hold any water at all. He's very much a corporatist and neoliberal warmongering person, like many of the other politicians we have.
Right, and of course that speaks to the whole concept that Democrat or Republican, it doesn't really matter, the label. And so you are actually running for U.S. Senate with the Green Party. Talk a little bit about that, because I think that a lot of people feel that you're either an activist or you're gonna feed into the system. How do you feel about that, sort of duality, and is that a juxtaposition, or do you feel that what you're doing is part of your activism?
I have to say it's a very weird place for me right now, because I have been pushing from the outside and feeling like trying to work on the inside is a real waste of time. And so prior to this, I never put much resources or time into electoral politics at all. But I feel like we're starting to get into this interesting moment in time, both in the United States and globally, where these left political electoral movements are starting to arise. So we see in Greece Syriza, although it's not always an easy path, definitely. Podemos in Spain. We see in Canada right now the NDP is leading in the polls, which is pretty amazing. So at some point we have to start to bridge that gap and try to create this alternative political movement that's going to replace the dysfunctional one that we have right now. And so I see this campaign is both trying to build that and also raise awareness for a lot of issues that aren't being discussed.
And what are some of your platforms for the campaign? Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I'm running on a broad platform of economic, racial, and environmental justice, and within that, there's so much overlap and so many issues. But I want to bring attention to some really kind of key fights that are going on in Maryland right now, which is really just a microcosm of the same thing that's happening around the United States. So economically, we have tremendous wealth inequality. We have communities that have been disinvested in, and some of them are organizing to try to change that and create an alternative economic type of vision that really lifts people up. It's kind of anti-gentrification. Like, instead of building these new fancy buildings, why don't we put that into pathways to small businesses, cooperatives, alternative economics like credit unions, community credit unions, grocery co-ops, all these different things. So bringing attention to that is kind of an antidote, and also in Baltimore, we have a lot to talk about with police brutality, militarization of the police, mass incarceration. Martin O'Malley was kind of spearheading this whole arrest without probable cause thing that's thrown so many of our youth into jail and destroyed their possibilities for a future. When it comes to environmental justice, we're fighting off a huge fracked gas refinery that's being built right in a neighborhood of thousands of people in southern Maryland, and how we need to stop the fossil fuel infrastructure. Just stop it cold, no more investment, and move towards community-owned renewables is what I would favor. And the racial justice piece I talked on a little bit, but we'll be talking about the failed drug war, and a lot about also kind of the fact that we live in an empire, that people don't ever really talk about that, and that we're suffering from an empire economy, and we need to stop investing in military bases all around the world and start investing in really meeting our needs here at home and becoming a cooperative partner in the world instead of an aggressor. So those are kind of some of the main broad things we'll be talking about, as well as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, of course. So.
Well, right, and I'm curious because the Flush the TPP, which is one of the sites that you've started as well. A lot of things are coming up in October and November for that. So how will your campaign work with, and how will that affect your activism that you pretty much do constantly?
Well, I'll still be doing the activism constantly, and hopefully the campaign will follow me around while I'm doing that. Because, like I said, it's going to be an interesting experiment about how we bridge this. But I see that, the work that we do through activism is integral to change, and that's got to be part of the campaign as well, and continue once we get into office. We've got to keep fighting. This is really a battle. We don't have a lot of time here to really start to change things and turn our energy policy around, our economic policy around. So this is just another way to fight.
So it really seems like part of the message is that politicians need to be activists and activists should be politicians. Would that be a correct summary?
Look at what's happening in Spain, in Barcelona, where they elected Ada Colau, the woman who was an anti-foreclosure activist. I think that we fight these things in the street, but at some point we need to be getting in there and be the ones that are writing the laws or meeting with these agencies that are supposed to be serving the public good and really starting to hold them accountable for whether they're doing that or not.
And finally, I tend to ask this of a lot of people on the left, particularly if they're interested in running for office. The far right, like the Tea Party, has done an excellent job of getting people like them, who think like them, in office. And the left has not done a good job of getting occupiers and left activists into office. And what would you say to people who, A, don't vote, or B, feel that any way feeding into the system is only going to be a negative return?
I can totally understand that. We live in a mirage democracy right now. It's a very rigged system. And when you only have a choice of a Democrat or Republican that have been pre-approved by Wall Street before they even get there, it is not really a choice. So I tell people, don't put a lot of your time into electoral politics right now. Really focus on movement building and activism. Unless, for the people who are feeling like they're ready to take that step into electoral politics, definitely do it. We've got to build up this political alternative of being independent. And I think we're starting to see some positive signs right now where you see like the Shama Sawants, who ran as a socialist, is also willing to talk to and work with Greens, and Greens are willing to work with a socialist alternative. And together it's much stronger. Like, I'd like to see more of that on the left. I'd like to see socialist, Labor Party, independent progressive parties that are actually independent of the Democrats. Let's make that, and Greens, like, working together and realizing that we agree on pretty much everything. So let's, help each other get into office.
The mirage of democracy. Damn, that should be a banner drop over the Capitol building. Just saying. To learn more about Margaret Flowers' campaign for Senate, check out flowersforsenate.org. And, of course, her activism and information sites, Popular Resistance, It's Our Economy, and Flush the TPP.